Jesse Watters assumed it would be another simple part. He has done this a million times before, but he was completely wrong. When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett methodically tore apart his argument in front of millions of people, it changed what was intended to be a simple back and forth into an epic fight. Everything changed when she spoke. Things started to go wrong less than 2 minutes into the segment. No small talk to start things off. Just cutting words, flat eyes, and two people who are fighting one another and have no plans to give up. Jesse Watters was sitting straight up in his chair with his chin slightly up and his gaze on the monitor. His voice had the classic Fox edge, half charm, half bait. He was ready to push, prod, and provoke, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't seem to be bothered at all by what he was saying. She gently adjusted her earpiece, tilted her head slightly, and made it apparent with her face that she wasn't here to play games. She didn't blink very much. She let Jesse continue his introduction, which was the same old story about how the radical left was taking away voting rights and how he was trying to please criminal justice activists. Then, without thinking, she replied, "That's not only wrong, Jesse, it's lazy." The silence that followed was deafening. Jesse lifted his eyebrows in surprise at how direct her answer was, but she wasn't done. Jasmine leaned in, not with her body, but with her words, which sounded like someone who had gone through the fire and wasn't going to back down. She said, "If you're going to talk about voting access and criminal justice in the same breath, you better have more than talking points." Boom. That was the point of no return. The balance of power changed right away. Jesse tried to cut her off 3 times, but she stayed calm and made her point with clear, calm arguments. No yelling or waving. Just the facts, one after the other. Do you know how many polling places were taken away from black neighborhoods in Texas during the last election? Jasmine inquired. Be quiet. Jesse looked down at his papers to try to get his bearings. Lots, she went on. Do you know what proportion of claims of police brutality are thrown out without being looked at? More than 95%. So, Jesse, are you asking about the law or are you doing something? The quiet in the studio got much louder. The room was full of energy. The floor manager even stopped talking. You could feel the tension in the air. There was a little tick in Jesse's temple, which showed that he was upset. He looked away from the camera, maybe at a producer or maybe at no one in particular. Then he snapped back in, striving to get things back under control. He responded with a forced smile and a harsh voice. That's quite a speech. But Jasmine didn't move. I gave you a real answer, she said back. You just weren't ready to hear it. The control room could tell that Jesse had lost his grasp. There were a lot of reactions on Twitter. Jasmine just ended Jesse on live TV. People wrote a lot of comments. The piece wasn't even over yet it was evident who the audience was rooting for. Jasmine had just made Jesse appear insignificant. Why does she sound like she knows more than anyone else on the panel? One tweet said, "This is what happens when someone shows up with receipts." The video footage went viral and had 2 million views by midnight. It was trending all over the place by sunrise. This was no longer simply about politics. This was about having a voice, being present, and having power. Who gets to say the last word, and what do you do when the person you're attempting to scare doesn't move? But the drama behind the scenes was what most people didn't see. What happened before the camera started rolling? That was the start of the true change. Jesse Watters was pacing uncomfortably in a tiny hallway behind Studio 5B in Manhattan Beach, California, 6 hours before the episode. There was something wrong. During these parts, Jesse was normally calm, but today he was on edge and irritable. Every few minutes, his phone buzzed with information from producers and personnel. Jesse had been told about Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a lawyer and first-term congresswoman from Texas. She is known for being vocal and cutting through the noise with ruthless accuracy. But he wasn't worried. He'd had fights with sharper tongues before. He knew the formula: push, prod, and get people angry. In the meantime, Jasmine Crockett was already ready and sat in a quiet room in Dallas. Her hair was simple and her makeup was done. She had on a navy blazer and a look that stated she wasn't here to show off. Tasha, her assistant, stood just beyond the camera, clutching flashcards with information about the case, voting suppression statistics, and recent changes to H.R. 7, 8, and 9. But Jasmine didn't need them. She knew precisely what Jesse was about to do. He was going to say that the bill was too lenient on crime and that she was advancing a Marxist agenda. She thought, let him try. These two folks had very different lives before they met. Jesse was born and reared in the suburbs of Philadelphia. He went to private schools, played lacrosse, and had internships in the media, all because to family ties. He wasn't bad. He just never had to justify himself like Jasmine did. Jasmine was from Shreveport, Louisiana. She recalls carrying her small brother to school and felt the anxiety as they passed a police car. She held his hand tighter. Her law degree wasn't simply a piece of paper to her. It was armor. Everyone else thought that every TV segment, panel, and hearing didn't mean much to her. Jesse was getting his mic checked in the studio again. A producer leaned in and told him to keep cool. The producer said, "She's smart, but don't let her spin it." Jesse nodded, but he could hardly hear him. He had already made plans for his attack. He was going to advocate aggressively for legislation that put criminals first and say that liberals were blind to true crime data. It didn't matter that some of the numbers were drawn out of a hat. The event was more about enthusiasm than accuracy. He was good at playing the game. In the meantime, Jasmine put her earpiece in. The text said, 5 minutes. Jasmine breathed out through her nose and focused. She thought about how her mom was watching from home, the people in her district, the calls, and the letters. People had told her at churches and grocery shops, don't let them talk over you. She wasn't furious. She was prepared. The clock started to count down. 3, 2, 1. The segment was broadcast live. Jesse started his frame right as the camera zoomed in, saying, "Tonight, we're joined by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who is pushing what some are calling a reform bill. Some people argue it's merely a sneaky technique to reward breaking the law." Jasmine didn't move. "That's an interesting way to look at it, Jesse," she stated in a calm but forceful voice. "But if you've read the bill, which I assume you have, you know it doesn't do anything like that." Jesse laughed nervously. "Be careful now, Congresswoman. You don't want to sound like you're looking down on someone." Jasmine smiled, but not in a polite way. "It's not condescension if it's based on facts." The control room went quiet. Jesse moved in his seat, evidently put off by how calm she was. The debate's normal flow had been broken. Jesse tried to get back in charge by asking the same loaded questions. But Jasmine always found a way to get away from him when he tried to corner her. "You want to talk about keeping people safe? Let's talk about how taking away polling places in low-income areas makes people less likely to vote, which directly affects the lack of progress in policy. That makes things dangerous in the first place." Jesse was clearly upset now. He looked over his cue cards and attempted to get back on track, but Jasmine wasn't going to give up. She said, "Crime doesn't happen in a vacuum. And if you want to talk about policy, you need to know the roots, not just the symptoms." This was it, the video that would go viral. Jesse had lost control. Jesse was on the back foot when the next part started. It wasn't just about the bill anymore. It was about them. The digital fallout has already started. Jasmine had won the section, but the problems were just starting. The second portion was supposed to be a lighthearted talk, but Jesse, who was plainly shaken, was no longer following the script. He leaned forward and tried to get her to bite one last time. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, it's impossible to take a bill seriously when the neighborhoods it says it will safeguard are nonetheless witnessing more crime and fewer convictions. Doesn't that suggest your plan isn't working?" Jasmine leaned in a little, and her voice was steady. She responded softly, "You're asking the wrong question. The internet already had the solution." Jasmine Crockett had just beaten Jesse Watters. It's not about whether crime exists. It's about whether we're using the same broken tools to fix it and expecting different results. This statement echoed throughout the room, and the topic changed course right away. Boom. Twitter was on fire. The argument was no longer simply about crime. It was also about the institutions we've set up to deal with it. Jesse grinned, but his eyes twitched. He tried to get the talk back on track, but she wouldn't let him. Okay, but let me ask you this, he said, but Jasmine cut him off. The change was small, yet it had a big effect. It wasn't just what she said, it was when she stopped responding to him and started directing the conversation. That's when it happened. Jasmine was in charge. Do you want to talk about crime, Jesse? She asked. Let's talk about the businesses that your network protects, businesses that fought against environmental laws, poisoned poor neighborhoods, and got tax breaks. The debate was no longer about crime on the streets. It was about the crime that no one ever talks about. You could feel the stress. Jesse had nothing to say. He sputtered, "We're talking about street crime, not businesses." What did Jasmine say? "Oh, so now we're picking which crimes are important?" Understood. The studio was quiet. The camera zeroed in on Jesse, who tried to alter the subject but failed. He tried to change the tone by being sarcastic and remarking, "Congresswoman, you clearly have rehearsed lines for everything." Jasmine shook her head, not disturbed. "No, I have lived experience for everything." And then something amazing happened. The remarks on the live feed changed. People who were watching the normal sparring bout were now seeing something that wasn't just an argument. It was a change. Jasmine wasn't just making a point. She was speaking up for people who had remained quiet for too long. "People are tired," Jasmine said, her words strong and unwavering. "I'm tired of being talked over, tired of watching bills die in committee while families bury loved ones, and you people fight over wording. Tired of being told they are furious when they are not giving up." Jesse, who was clearly upset now, cut her off. "Let's not make this about race," he remarked. But Jasmine cut him off. "You did that the moment you thought I didn't know what I was talking about. That moment was like a mic drop." And what happened next? There was silence. The people who worked at the studio stopped moving. The director even ceased issuing signals. They only watched. Jesse, who had lost, reclined back with his arms folded while Jasmine calmly told her side of the story. The section ended, and as the TV faded to black, something amazing was already happening. The moment wasn't done yet. It had already spread like wildfire. Activists, journalists, and regular people all clipped, subtitled, and disseminated the film in less than 30 minutes. It wasn't just the left who shared it. Even others who usually stood with Jesse were uneasy. This has nothing to do with politics. This was about sound. By the time the clip was on YouTube, it had already been seen by 500,000 people on other social media sites. It wasn't going to stop. People were reacting not only to the broadcast, but to years of being ignored, dismissed, and unheard. It wasn't about who won the debate in the chat. It was about who eventually talked and who paid attention. A community organizer in Oakland uploaded the video and said, "This wasn't a debate. This was a time of judgment." People noticed, even in places where people don't usually have progressive ideas. A veteran police officer in Flagstaff said, "I don't agree with her politics, but I'll be honest. She stood her ground like I haven't seen in a while." But Jesse wasn't ready to give up yet. His crew didn't say anything, believing the noise would go away on its own. But that quiet simply made things worse. It made it seem like something had gone very wrong behind the scenes. The quiet made the fire grow. People began to wonder if Jesse had been punished. Was Fox planning to change the replay? Would they get rid of the whole part? Not getting a response only made the buzz stronger. At the same time, Jasmine's squad wasn't happy. Jasmine didn't want to be in the news. She wanted the law to be the main emphasis. But the machine didn't function like that. Tasha, her assistant, stated, "You just said it without asking." At that point, Jasmine understood that this wasn't just about her. This was about more than just the two of them. But the change wasn't done yet. In less than 48 hours, the movement acquired its own energy. Students at college created a campaign on TikTok with the hashtag #ShyShy for Remember H7892. asking people to pay attention to the bill and not just the fight. Jesse was feeling more and more pressure. Conservative media tried to make the situation look bad by saying that Jasmine's reaction was a temper tantrum, but the video was true. Jesse's efforts to make her look bad were failing. Jesse's crew said, "We encourage lively debate on all sides, but last night's segment was marked by a lack of decorum from our guest." What about that? That statement went viral next. Jasmine's name was trending online, but she didn't take part in the show. She stayed calm and thought about what was next, but the attacks were coming. The digging began. Conservative blogs started posting articles that questioned her qualifications and her past. They were set on bringing her back to the stereotype of an angry, unqualified, unpredictable politician. But Jasmine wouldn't back down. It was evident from her message that the conflict wasn't finished. The fight for space, voice, and justice was just getting started. Once the harm is done, it's hard to fix things. Jesse Watters tried again by appearing on a different Fox show the next night. He seemed relaxed and smiled, but if you looked closer, you could see that he was still tense, just below the surface. He brushed it off when asked about the now famous part. "It's showbiz. People get fired up, that's why we watch." But everyone who had seen the video understood it wasn't simply showbiz. It was real. Jesse was angry behind that laugh. He started telling his staff to investigate into Jasmine's political donors to find any inconsistencies in her voting record. He didn't say it out loud, but it was apparent what he meant. If she made him seem bad on his own show, there would be consequences. Jasmine could feel it too. The tone of the emails changed. People quietly canceled requests for meetings. A handful of the donors stopped talking, but she wasn't shocked. She told her assistant Kian, "That's how it works. You talk clearly, and all of a sudden they act like you yelled. You make a point, and they act like you pulled a knife." The game had shifted. This was no longer just one interview. It was about what happens when someone doesn't fold and the systems that kick in to punish them for it. Things were about to become worse, and they didn't simply remain online. The insults got personal. It all began with a knock on Jasmine's door. She had just ended an interview on the radio when her assistant Tasha came into the room. Her face was pallid. "You need to see this," she said. There was a screenshot of an email on Tasha's phone. The subject line was, "Confirmation of canceled event. Safety concerns noted." It was for a bipartisan young voter conference in Indianapolis that Jasmine had agreed to speak at months earlier. The explanation was ambiguous, but it was easy enough to read between the lines. Given the current climate surrounding Congresswoman Crockett's media coverage and considering the expected security presence, we have decided to proceed without guest speakers this year. Jasmine gave the phone back, nodded once, and said, "So it begins." But it didn't end there. Her office had 4 additional cancellations in just 2 days. A conversation with a panel in Minneapolis, a visit to a school in Austin. 2 fundraisers were pulled by the hosts, who said they didn't want to cause any trouble. Then the messages started coming in. First, they called each other names like they always do. Fake email addresses. Anonymous trolls said she was playing the victim. But the threats got worse by Thursday night. An envelope was sent to her Dallas district office. There was a newspaper clipping of her face and a scribbled message that said, "Keep talking and we'll make sure you never speak again." Her staff wrote a report, and the FBI started an investigation. Security was tighter, but Jasmine didn't seem to care, at least not in public. She strolled through the corridors of Congress like she always did. That day, she only posted once on social media, a short message under a black and white picture of Shirley Chisholm that said, "They will come for your voice before they come for your seat." But behind closed doors, the toll was rising. That weekend, her mother, Darlene, contacted her crying. "Why do they hate you so much, baby?" she asked. "You didn't scream. You didn't even get angry. You just spoke your truth," Jasmine said, but she didn't know what to say. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, looking at the ceiling with her phone in her hand. She had expected some resistance. She has done hard interviews previously, but this wasn't a fight. Someone intended to make an example out of her, and this was planned and targeted. Jesse Watters wasn't taking it easy either. People on the internet were starting to look into his past. There were clips from past portions that showed things he had said offhand. These statements suddenly seemed sharper, more contemptuous, and, to be honest, more revealing. When he talked to women, especially women of color, in a rude way, independent media sites began to call him out. It became clear that he liked to interrupt, put people down, and change the subject. Jesse was shaken for the first time in a long time. One Fox executive stated plainly on an internal conference call, "Did you underestimate her?" Jesse got angry. "I didn't think she was less than me. I thought there would be a debate, not a TED Talk." But the question lingered with him. It rang out in every quiet moment. Those words, flattened, outclassed, and disarmed, stayed in the air. Jesse wasn't used to being the one who had to defend himself, and when he feels trapped, he strikes. One night, while the show was being filmed live, he leaned into a monologue called "The Real Faces of False Outrage." He didn't name her, but he constructed a picture of politicians who use identity to get sympathy points, but it didn't work for people who had witnessed the first exchange. It made him look small, thin-skinned, and resentful, if anything. Even his most loyal fans began to ask, "Why are you still talking about this, Jesse?" It seems like she got to him. One thing was evident as both sides dug in. This wasn't going to end. The cost was no longer merely political. It was also personal. It hurt. Sunday morning came, and it was calm but heavy. Jasmine Crockett was sitting in her living room with her knees crossed under her in an oversized college sweatshirt. The tea on the table was getting cold. She didn't want to check her phone, even if it buzzed every few seconds. She didn't feel like responding to anything for the first time in days. Her mother was sitting across the room observing. Her speech was gentle and her eyes were down. "Have you ever thought about just leaving all of this behind?" she asked. Jasmine didn't say anything right away. She peered out the window. There were still kids riding their bikes, laughing, and yelling outside. Life was still going on, just not inside this house. "Sometimes," Jasmine finally said. "But not today." Her voice didn't break, but the bags beneath her eyes gave her away. That morning, her office got 2 additional threatening voicemails, both of which mentioned her appearance on Fox. One of them went into great length about her dress. The other one ended with the words, "You're not untouchable." Jasmine played them once and then again. After that, she got rid of them. Kian had told her to hire private security for her next event out of state. Tasha wanted to stop traveling altogether, but Jasmine said no. She answered, "They've already won if I let them rattle me." But she wasn't sure if she still believed it. Jesse wasn't doing any better in Los Angeles either. He had yelled at his assistant, left the set in the middle of a pre-recording, and turned down 2 requests from Fox's media team for interviews. People on staff said he appeared tired. Some people felt it was more than that. He appeared embarrassed. He hadn't been hit like this in public in years. The night before, his wife Camille asked him, "Do you wish you hadn't done the segment?" He laughed. "No, I wish I hadn't lost it." That stayed with her. Not how it happened or why, just losing. That was what made him the most upset. As the week wore on, Jasmine got a call from a Fort Worth organizer who she had helped years before. The woman added, "I just wanted to say thank you. You let a lot of us stop shrinking." Jasmine took a big gulp. "I didn't mean to start all of this," she said. The woman said, "You didn't. You just stopped saying sorry." But it was hard to get to sleep. Lack of decorum was what Jasmine heard every time she closed her eyes. Fighting. Acting like a victim. Words that weren't spoken during the interview, but filled the vacuum thereafter, like static. The insults weren't just directed at her. Someone had followed her younger brother home from work. Someone had disclosed the phone number of a family member. Reporters began reaching out to old classmates in search of incriminating information, but Jasmine kept coming back, even in the middle of it all. Meetings of the budget committee, town halls, and votes on the floor of the House. She stepped in with her shoulders straight and her voice strong. She had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to be quiet. Not right now. And something unexpected was going on outside of the spotlight. It wasn't coming from her critics. It was coming from regular folks who had seen something different on TV at that time. By the middle of the week, the talk had gone much beyond cable news. What began as a heated live argument between a well-known TV host and a congressman in her first term had spread to homes, schools, barbershops, and church halls. It wasn't just two people fighting on television anymore. It had grown into something greater and harder to control. A social studies teacher at T. Washington High School in Tulsa stopped her course to show the viral video of Jasmine calmly taking apart Jesse's framing. Most of her students were juniors, and they all observed in silence. One girl raised her hand and remarked, "Why did they act like it's wrong to be that confident if you're black?" When the video was over, the room got quiet, and then a boy in the back said, "Because they don't expect it." The teacher didn't need to say anything else because the lesson was over. Gloria, a retired nurse, had her weekly card night with friends at her home in Cleveland. It was usually full of music, laughter, and gossip, but this week the talk was different. Gloria said she spoke like she didn't need to ask anyone's permission as she shuffled the deck. "I loved it. I haven't seen that level of strength on live TV since Barbara Jordan. She made that man blink," said another woman. They laughed, but there was more to it than that: relief, pride, and acknowledgement. These people weren't just fans of Jasmine Crockett. They were women who had been talked over, cut off, or ignored for decades, and they knew what it meant to stand your ground, especially when the odds were against you. The news even got people talking in more conservative places. An older white man in a barber shop in Idaho Falls put down his paper and said, "That woman, she didn't yell once." Not once, yet he still looked dumb. You have to respect that. It was going on all around. People weren't talking about the bill. They weren't saying what the party said. They were remembering how it felt to see someone preserve their dignity while someone else tried to take it away on live TV. And in the middle of all that, something started to change. Jasmine's office was flooded with emails, but not hate mail. They were all thank you notes. A lot of them. A grandma in New Mexico complimented her for standing up for the truth without making a big deal out of it. A college student in Detroit said the moment gave her the courage to speak up in class. A postal worker in Fresno just wrote, "I saw you. I heard you. Thanks." Jasmine read each and every one. Some of them made her giggle. Some made her cry. One from a woman in Kentucky made her stop completely. It said, "My daughter is 9. She wanted to know if you were in charge of that guy." I said to her, "No, sweetie, she was just brave enough not to let him be in charge of her." That hurt Jasmine's heart because they had seen bravery, not bravado. A moment of self-control, not anger. The response she had to deal with just made the difference more clear. She hadn't become angry. She hadn't said anything bad about him. She had just said no to letting someone else decide how she would be there. Jesse also saw the change. There were more than just angry emails from the left in his mailbox. Some longtime fans were let down, not because he lost a discussion, but because he seemed more interested in being right than being polite. One note stayed with him. A veteran from Pennsylvania said, "Son, we all make mistakes on the air, but when you don't know how to say you're sorry, that's when you start to seem little. Don't let your pride make you small." Jesse didn't say anything, but he printed it off, folded it once, and put it in his desk drawer. The buzz around the clip started to die down, but the effect it had on people kept getting bigger. Schools began to make lesson plans based on it. Podcasts explained what was really going on. Some MPs even brought it up in remarks on the floor, not to earn points, but to talk about tone and how tone can be used as a weapon. What went on between Jesse and Jasmine didn't simply happen in that part. People remembered it because it was like their own meetings, classes, court dates, and job applications, where they had to show they earned the place they were already in. But a viral video or a hot issue wouldn't be the last word on this. It would depend on what Jasmine did next and how she used the voice they tried to take away. 2 weeks later, the tape was no longer popular, but it was still there. The news stories had changed. The news cycle had moved on to the next big story, the next hot mic incident, or the next political mistake. But there was something about what transpired between Jesse Watters and Jasmine Crockett that left a mark on people, not in the news. Every time Jasmine walked into a room, she felt it. At an education roundtable in Tempe, a teacher might draw her aside and say, "You made my daughter think she could run for office one day." A grocery store clerk in St. Louis requested for a picture, not because she liked politics, but because, as she put it, "You reminded me I'm not crazy." It didn't feel like being famous. It felt like home. But there was a price to pay for that home. Jasmine's security detail stayed closer. They still had to look through her emails. Some of the smear attempts had tapered down, but every time she put something online, someone emerged out of the woodwork to make her look bad, change what she said, or tell her to calm down. But she didn't stop. She learned to stop, take a breath, and ponder before hitting send. It was never about that one moment on TV. It was about what the event opened up, what it showed, and what it scared. Jasmine was mankers. To versira bara spanktaven better set of praise. Was there a Jamin? In the jealous, Jan and here, but for a further vet. For or no less daffamol, and bedja benefacts it is. Oh, in a jewel and iglis. Oh, I fell fortune, he ending them. Still wouldn't talk bad about Jesse in interviews. She always stated that the segment wasn't about winning when people asked her about it. It was about being heard, she added. And people remembered that. At the same time, Jesse went back to his usual portions. The light, the tone, and the beat are all the same. But some of his longtime fans did notice. He didn't interrupt as often. He asked further questions after that. And once, at a panel with a guest he clearly disagreed with, he said something that shocked everyone. "You're not wrong. I just think you're starting from a different place." It went by fast, without being cut or shared. But that did happen. A minor bit had changed. Jesse never talked about Jasmine Crockett again, at least not directly. But one time, when the cameras weren't rolling, he told a coworker something that startled even him. "She didn't make me feel bad. She didn't need me to tell her she was right." And that was what got me. That line never got out, but it didn't need to. In Dallas, Jasmine stood behind a podium in a crowded town hall and held a printed copy of her first bill, H.R. 7892. This was the law that never got the attention it needed. She read a part out loud, but not to the politicians. She read it to the people who lived there, the nurses, the teachers, and the youngsters who were sitting on the floor with their legs crossed. When she was done, she glanced up and stated, "This bill is about being responsible, not just for the police, but also for the media, politics, and ourselves." There was no sound. After that, a woman in the second row raised her hand and said, "How do you stay calm when everyone is coming at you?" Jasmine smiled softly. "I don't always, but I keep clear." People frequently come for your tone since they can't touch your truth. Later, the statement, "they can't touch your truth," would be printed on t-shirts that were sold to raise money for initiatives that get people involved in their communities. Not because it was catchy, but because it seemed like it was deserved. The moment on Fox News had passed, but the affect had lasted. People remembered how it felt to witness someone stand up for what they believed in and speak with the type of clarity that doesn't ask for permission. And the lesson wasn't only about race, gender, or politics. It was about space, who can take it, who should shrink, and what happens when someone doesn't follow the rules. In the end, neither of them left the same way they came. Jesse understood what it was like to be challenged by someone who didn't care what other people thought. Jasmine found out how much louder the world gets when you stop saying you're sorry. What about the rest of us? We were reminded that sometimes the best thing a person can do is to say no to being little. Don't keep it to yourself if this tale made you feel something, like pride, rage, or hope. Let others know. Talk about it. And if you haven't already, sign up. The truth is, it deserves more than one moment. It needs a place to stand.